Mimi in Australia. Hey, Mimi, you are on
Hi.
the air for Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hi, not much. Hi, Dan. Hi, Andy.
Of course you called.
Of course I called.
What's your relationship with Mimi?
We're friends, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mimi's going to be on my channel next week, actually. I told them specifically not to call.
Don't worry. It's a real question.
Well, go ahead, Mimi.
I was wondering how Teal's online cult differs from other online New Age cults like Maharishi's cult or Nityananda's or to an extent Bratzo's cult. And who have resorted to broadcasting online as well.
Good question. I would like to know that as well.
Yeah, I can only speak to what I know and what I'm aware of. I think every cult is different. I think if it fits the model, then we can call it a cult. But each cult's going to have its own little thing, its own little thing it does, its own map of reality. You know, I think in the case of Teal, what we're talking about is much more of a New Age idea. Rather than some of the other groups that you mentioned there that build on different traditions. As anyone who's familiar with the New Age will know, what we're talking about here is something that is built out of lots of different traditions that are pulled together in what I would perhaps call a more superficial way, and sort of bound together and turned into something kind of like create your own religion, isn't it? Really, a lot of the New Age thing. And so in the case of Teal,
same thing.
Yeah,
you
you get that.
Repackaged.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, we talked about this before again, but it is kind of a repackaging, right, of different kinds of ideas. There's nothing I've seen specifically from Teal. I mean, except maybe some of those processes that you were talking about. You know, maybe she has her own patented method there. But
Yeah.
but other places have methods too, right? Like maybe the details are different, but there's always a method to enlightenment. There's always some sort of step-by-step process to where you're going to get some results. Now, that's not to say that every, method out there isn't going to get you somewhere. I mean, I think if you pick up like a meditation practice, for example, you're probably going to get some results out of that. You may not be able to talk to God, but maybe your life will improve in some sort of measurable way. I don't know enough about Teal's stuff to know like what's the end game there for some of those methods. Like what are you trying to achieve when you pick up Teal Swan's teachings and Teal Swan's methods? Like what's the end game there?
A lot of it does kind of speak to sort of mental health issues or struggles in life, things being difficult and trying to overcome that. Really, the sell on the law of attraction in general is you can have what you want and you can live the life you want to live. And then obviously when we're looking at Teal's situation, we also have to consider the kinds of people that she has following her, the way that she speaks to those people. Some of the words Teal uses quite a lot, words like powerlessness, victimhood, things like that. And I think she's
also referred to her group as a psych ward.
Yeah. Have I heard is it Moreau's Island or something like that as well in relation
it was in the news, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of concerning things in that regard. But I think also another thing that perhaps sets Teal's group as apart from others is, like you mentioned, Dan, that these processes, there's like an element of perhaps a psychological or psychology cult, and then an element of a spiritual cult, and then an element of something that to some extent does run like a traditional sort of self-help guru business model kind of thing, all kind of hodgepodge together, But I do feel like the end game for a lot of people, like for me, speaking for myself, the end game for me was to make sense of things, to feel like I understood the world, to feel safe in the world, to feel like I could overcome the difficulties that I was facing in terms of my mental health, in terms of, the struggles that I was going through in my life at the time.
Man, I think that's the goal for a lot of people, isn't it? When they kind of join a lot of these organizations, they want to get answers. I know I certainly did when I was a part of the various Christian organizations that I served in. And like we were talking about before, it's a natural human need to kind of figure this stuff out. And I think if you sell your ideas like, hey, we're taking the good parts out of all this other stuff and putting it into one thing, because I think a lot of people would agree with the statement. There's some truth in a lot of religions. There's some good ideas in some religions, right? Like it's and for some people, they're gonna say they don't want to throw everything out, right? They want to keep some stuff. I'd rather try to take the most true stuff out of that equation, whether or not it makes me feel good. But regardless, some people, that's not really their aims, and if they get caught up in that stuff. And I also think there's very intelligent people that get caught up in a lot of this stuff. I think there's a grave misconception that happens when we put this idea that people who are easily suggestible can fall into cults or into ideologies like this, and that's definitely not true. And I think you would probably speak to this too. I'm sure you've talked to several people that you know that you would consider very smart that still believe this stuff just as much as you did at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same here,
I personally, I don't know if that was to Andey or to me.
Well, both of you guys, I guess. Now I got both of you on here, yeah.
I've known a lot of smart people, like, with full degrees and, like, really, I don't know, looked up to careers, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You would say, that have easily just like that fallen into it, and it's really sad, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. I mean, Hassan talks about this a bit as well, because there's a misconception about cults, isn't there, that you have to be gullible or stupid to get pulled into something like that. But that's just not the case. Like, it's anyone can get pulled into it. And I mean, there's a whole thing with a group in started in Australia that I'm sure you're familiar with, Mimi, Universal Medicine.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of people there that are involved in that group that are like fully educated people, like really like doctors and things like that, that you would think, no way they're going to get pulled into it, but people do. It's again, like we kind of said, I feel like to some extent maybe it's speaking to a need that people have, but at the same time, like Hassan talks about, all that really needs to be happening is that you're going through a change in your life, small, big, whatever it is, and someone comes to you at that moment, or you find in the case of what I went through, you find a video on the internet, right. and that's the start of it.
And this is why I even want to talk about this kind of stuff on this show, because I personally just hate the exploitation of vulnerable people, especially people who are going through some sort of emotional change in their life, and then they're sold something that's going to promise to give them all the answers. Whether that's a cult, whether that's a multi-level marketing scheme, sometimes those two are not different. But whatever it is, like I want to expose that as much as possible. I want to be able to show people and give people the tools like, hey, look, this may sound really appealing, but you got to look at X, Y, and Z. And I know that's hard work, and I know that takes some time, and I know that's not always what we want to hear, but you got to, or else you end up in a place you don't want to be. So,
and if you already believe it, it can be like pretty jarring to see all the evidence and be like, oh, this thing I believed isn't actually what I thought it was.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Mimi, thanks so much for calling into the show today. Thanks for giving Andey a bit of a surprise there. I'm sure, I despite the look on his face, I think you can tell he really appreciates it. So
I thought I was going to talk shit about him, but no.
Well,
thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Mimi. Really appreciate it. So yeah. I wish I could go back to, I don't know, some people in my old community I've had conversations with and stuff, but it is hard. I feel like it's different talking to people who I used to run with in my circles, and it's like I don't have the same relationship with those kinds of people. Do you share the same kind of feelings? Like, can you not relate to the people you knew in the same way, or do you get along just fine?
Well, I grew up around different kinds of ideas like this. I have Jehovah's Witnesses in the family. I've also got people who believe in the law of attraction in the family. So I'm around it enough to be able to have a dialogue with people and not fall out about it. Not always in the case of Jehovah's Witness family members, but that's a whole other thing. But I, in terms of the people that I met who are still into it, in the case of like following Teal. I don't know very many people now that I used to know at the time who are still involved in it. Many people have left, and a lot of them probably just wouldn't want to talk to me. I've now I've put myself on a side of the fence now in talking about Teal. I can be considered a hater or an anti-Tealer or whatever it is that the term that they're using now. And so a lot of them don't want to talk, and they just assume I'm all sorts of things, you know. They
You're
just
a doubter. You're a dissident.
Yeah.
You know, you don't agree with them anymore. And now you can't, you're shunned in almost a way. Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty common. More common than what people would think. And that's the other thing too. I want to get to the next call here, but just to point out, like, you know, this isn't as obscure as people realize it is. Like, yes, it is, like, obviously not every single person you know in your life is going to be involved in something like this. But I guarantee if you look at your family or your friends, somebody in there is going to be believing in something like this. It may not be, you know, to the degree at which maybe Andey was at, but it can be a multi-level marketing thing. It could be, you know, some sort of thing, because they're all out there. I mean, especially in the United States. But, you know, there's just, you know, there's these little tiny connections, and then there's these groups of people that you may not have heard of and you don't know much about, but when you look more into them, it's like, oh my gosh, this is really terrible, you know, and so getting the word about this stuff is out there is